It soared from 0 5 years ago to 600 last month and more recently over $1,000. According to a Malta-based brokerage, Exante, it's behind the best performing hedge fund in history. The global computing power is 256 times faster than the top 500 supercomputers combined. The Chinese are now talking about banning it. This is Tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight we look at Bitcoins, a currency that has no physical properties, but it's taking the world by storm. Joining me to discuss this, Marcus Swanepoel, co-founder of Switchless, which owns BitX, a market platform that allows individuals to trade Bitcoins using South African Rands, and Arthur Goldstuck, the managing director of World Wide Worx. Arthur Goldstuck, to you first. Do you buy Bitcoins? Do you believe Bitcoins? Do you think that there is a future for Bitcoins? You're a tech guru.
I think Bitcoins are a wonderful adventure. And it's great if you're open to speculation and you're willing to take a gamble. But to take it seriously as a currency, you are really entering a casino and treating the chips on the tables as a serious currency.
Okay, now that is throwing down the gauntlet to you, Marius. I mean, explain to us, please, the concept of the Bitcoin. And it's a virtual currency created by a computer program that is tradable anywhere in the world.
Yes, Bruce. I think there's a lot of complexities around the actual system of Bitcoin, but maybe if we can just summarize it in a couple of seconds, you can think of it as a distributed accounting ledger that's kept all around the world on a lot of different computers. And when you own a Bitcoin, it's a debit in the ledger, and someone else might have a debit somewhere else. And when you want to move the money, this Bitcoin infrastructure will move this money in the public ledger.
What underpins it? What underpins the value of a Bitcoin?
What underpins it is just the belief that between you and someone else that there is value in this Bitcoin. So when you look back a couple of years when it was started, it was really seen as a joke. People, kind of hobbyists, used it and so on. But as time went by, people started taking it seriously and realizing there is potential to transact with this as a currency. So when I was in Silicon Valley the past few months, I would buy my coffee with Bitcoin. I spent a lot of time in Berlin, in Kreuzberg. I buy my beer and a burger with Bitcoin. So while it's still very small, I think it's starting to move towards potentially going mainstream as a transactional currency. And I think that's an important point. But when you mentioned speculation and people making money out of it, it was never designed as a speculative instrument. It was done merely as a currency. Now, there's been a bit of a media rage at the moment, and I think a lot of people are jumping into it and thinking they can make money from it. But it was never designed for that reason.
If I said to you, I believe in fairies, okay, yes, you would send people around with a white jacket and they would strap my arms up like this and they would lock me in a very dark room and give me lots of medication.
Yes.
I believe in Bitcoins, now suddenly I have to take you seriously.
And I think, but I mean, the same thing goes for your money in the bank, right? You believe that there is actually money in the bank, even though it's just on a screen. And there's some form of trust that's created there. And this is the brand of the bank and maybe some backing by the government. Now, the way the Bitcoin protocol was designed is for there to be absolute trust. The way the system works.
And that's the point, because ever since Richard Nixon took America off the gold standard, you'll remember this better than I will, Arthur. 1971, I think it was, Richard Nixon took America off the gold standard and basically created the fiat currencies, currencies that float, currencies that have no underpin of value other than our belief that they have a value. Now, you're either going to believe in Bitcoin or you're not going to believe in Bitcoin. If I put $1,000 worth of Bitcoins on the table here or put $1,000 in $100 bills over here, you would take the $1,000 in dollar bills, I assume.
Well, your fairy analogy is quite a good one, because in 1921, two sisters faked photos of fairies at the bottom of their garden. And one of the great believers in their claims was Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yes.
And thanks to him believing it and spouting the religion, so to speak, for a decade, all of England believed in fairies, until someone essentially said, look, the emperor wears no clothes, or maybe the fairies wear no clothes. And suddenly that belief dissipated. But it took probably another 60 years before it was finally debunked completely, when one of the surviving sisters confessed to what they had done.
But this is slightly different, and I must concede that this is slightly different. That this is almost like, forgive me, and I'm going to get hate mail for it, but it's like having a religious faith. You don't know it's there, but you believe it's there.
But on the other hand, let's go back to the beginnings of the modern financial system, which was in the 17th century, when banks, as we know them today, first emerged. And it wasn't only the banks, but also large trading houses. They issued their own, what you might call promissory notes,
checks,
which were in effect checks. And the only thing that gave those checks value was the confidence that each of these institutions had in the other, that they could honor that commitment, that there was value to this piece of paper. But it was a belief in the value behind that piece of paper.
But there was a tangible good behind that. I could take physical goods. I could take cotton, for example, from Persia, wool from Persia. I could then put it on a camel with a promissory note to pay somebody in 6 months' time. There was an underlying...
Except that you didn't know, as someone receiving that payment, you didn't always know what was underpinning it. You just had to believe, and you had to have faith. Very much like Bitcoin today.
Exactly,
so
and the same thing happens. It's very interesting because we speak about Bitcoin and everyone wants to know, how does it work, where does it come from, where does the money go, who started it? When someone swipes their Visa card, no one asks any questions. And it's actually a very complicated thing that happens in the background. But they trust the brand, so they don't ask too many questions. And I think that maybe one thing just to add to the fairy tale thing, the one big difference is the Bitcoin protocol is open. It is completely, everyone can see exactly how it operates. It's open source code. There's nothing sinister about it. There's nothing hidden about its operations.
Okay, so in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Ben Bernanke come out and say perhaps there's something to this. It's worked its way onto the World Economic Forum agenda in Davos. But the little bits that do worry me, Alan Greenspan, who during his tenure at the Fed never saw a bubble, he didn't know what a bubble was, is calling this a bubble, because what we've seen is Bitcoins go through $1,000 a coin because there's massive speculation. You said it wasn't designed to be speculated upon. But it is being speculated upon, which makes it vulnerable, to its credibility vulnerable.
Yes, and that's very true. I think it's hard to get exact statistics, but from people that are in the industry, we think that potentially up to 90% of the people using Bitcoin at the moment are speculating on it. Just maybe a caveat to that Alan Greenspan comment, if people see the actual interview, I think he was asked kind of off the cuff, and he actually started off by saying, I don't know, I don't understand Bitcoin. It looks like a bubble. So it wasn't a very well-informed view, and it's kind of been blown up a bit.
A lot of people say that about Alan Greenspan during his entire period as the
exactly.
governor.
But you're right, it is potentially a big bubble.
Bank of America Merrill Lynch had an 11-page report on it. Citibank has been a little bit more circumspect in its review of Bitcoin. It is cautious about this. But a Cypriot university, as I understand it, is taking its first Bitcoin payment. There are people who are willing to exchange a physical good for a promise.
I think
that is so unsettling.
One of the ways to look at it is a bit like the stock market, which we know is underpinned by real value in real businesses. But the value of the market as a whole is driven by emotion and by people's belief in it continuing to go down or continuing to go up, whether they're selling or they're buying. So I think there is an analogy in the serious world of serious investment, so one can't dismiss it. But at the same time, when the Chinese government says this isn't a real currency and our financial institutions are not allowed to trade in it.
But that is the point where, if currencies, if the dollar is about confidence, if the yuan is about confidence, if the rand is about confidence, Bitcoin is about confidence. Now, if the world's second biggest economy says we are not going to allow trade in this thing, the confidence, the confidence envelope disappears.
Okay, but let's just also clarify what the Chinese government said. In that same statement, they said individuals are allowed to trade with Bitcoin. So effectively, they are allowing it. They've just said they don't want banks to trade in it. Now,
because they don't trust
but
them.
But also, bear in mind, one of the biggest currencies in China is in-game purchases. People who play virtual games and they make acquisitions or they win what you might call property or virtual goods in these games, and they trade them. Now, before you even get to e-bucks, people trade these virtual goods, and there are people who make a living out of these virtual goods. So you could argue that the Chinese government allows that, so it's legitimate. Yes, it's a legitimate form of trade, but that doesn't make
and the issue with their banks is remember, they have to protect the banks, right? They don't want the banks to take exposure on Bitcoin. They don't want banks to own Bitcoin. They don't want banks to lend out Bitcoin, all of these things. Which is completely understandable.
Why is it understandable?
Because they don't understand it well enough. Remember that there's capital requirements in banks. There's all kinds of risk exposure the banks have. If you allow a bank to take on an instrument where you do not completely understand the risk and there's a lot of volatility in it, then the bank is taking on risk. But if individuals trade with it or through a financial institution or share trading platform where the bank doesn't actually take on exposure themselves, it's a very different story. And there are banks across the world where Bitcoin is being discussed at very senior levels in the bank, and not just as a passing comment or thinking about it as a fad.
When we look at the concept of bitcoins, we look at the physical value of bitcoins. So Arthur, I put $1,000 in banknotes, I put $1,000 of virtual money or Bitcoin over here. There's a chance that this Bitcoin could go to $10,000 looking at the volatility in it in the next 6 months. Your $1,000 are going to be worth $1,000 in 6 months. We know that.
If I didn't need the money,
yes.
if it was disposable income, no question I'd go for the Bitcoin.
Your Christmas present, your Christmas presents, Mr. Goldstuck, depend on this money.
If something depends on the money, then I go for the cash. No question.
And remember, you have to pay your taxes in the cash as well. That's a big difference. I would not recommend, even though we run a Bitcoin exchange, if your starting approach is I want to make money with Bitcoin, I would not recommend anyone to do it. In fact, I mean, you could lose all of your money on this, as we all know. You should think of it as a startup, any startup in Silicon Valley, where the chances of it actually becoming a success is actually very remote. Okay, but maybe just something.
So why would I buy a Bitcoin then?
Because you can think of it as a transactional currency going forward, but don't buy it with the idea of that you want to sell it in like 2 years' time for double the money. You can buy it to keep it, to spend it on goods and services.
But why would I do that when I've got perfectly nice rands or perfectly nice dollars?
Because it's a lot easier to transfer the money to merchants, right? So from a merchant point of view, if you're a shop, at the moment you pay fees between 2 and 4% when you accept payments. Now, for a lot of retailers, that's half their margin. Bitcoin, the transaction fees are negligible. So there's a strong incentive for merchants to accept Bitcoin, and that will drive consumers also then to spend the Bitcoin.
So the next time I go and see White Boson and I say to him, I've got this bag of groceries from Checkers, here's some Bitcoins, he's going to smack me in the mouth.
And I'll explain to you how the companies structure this, because it is an issue. I don't want to receive Bitcoin for something that's worth $100, tomorrow it's $200, the next day it's $50. So what companies like BitPay in the US do, and they've signed up to close to 20,000 merchants already, they guarantee a conversion on the back of that Bitcoin transaction. So on the front end, your company receives Bitcoin, it immediately gets converted back to cash, and you only see the cash in your bank account. You price it at $5, you get your $5.
I have to wrap up. Is this the beginning of the end for sovereign currencies, for central banks?
Certainly not. I think everyone in the Bitcoin community realized that there is going to be a regulation around it. Everyone wants regulation to play a role in it. So I don't think, it certainly is going to be interesting in terms of what type of currencies can be issued, but I don't think it will be the end of money as we know it.
I'm absolutely fascinated. I'm captivated. I'm sorry that we've run out of time. Your $1,000 is on the way. I'll give it to you in a bit. Sorry, I haven't got any cash with me right now. Marcus Swanepoel, co-founder of Switchless. It's an online exchange. And Arthur Goldstuck, the MD of World Wide Worx. Thanks very much for coming in. Nice to see you both. And thank you for watching. There'll be more tonight, tomorrow, and some Bitcoins if you like. Good night.